This is Thursday front page, 94.7 The Pulse. My name is Rob Cameron. We'll be here till 11 o'clock. Liz Carr dropped in for the first hour. She had to sneak off, unfortunately, just before 10 o'clock to do some other stuff. But on the line now, we have Melanie Macfarlane, who's going to talk about migration and the effect that it's had over the last 12 months, the massive changes in that area with the coronavirus, not just affecting Australia, but a global problem. Melanie, good morning to you.
Good morning, Rob. How are you?
I'm very good. Great to have you on the show. Really appreciate it. This is becoming an increasingly interesting subject. Migration is one that polarises a community. We certainly have well-known politicians who are speaking heavily against it, particularly some types of migration. We have universities that are screaming for it that can't seem to function without a huge input from international students coming to Australia to shore up the numbers, and that's probably the one that's under most threat and has universities around Australia very concerned about what's happening in 2021. What's the outlook look like in that space?
Well, Rob, yes, thank you. This is obviously, it's certainly a hot topic with the 63 international students who just arrived this week for the first pilot program into Darwin. Obviously this has been impacted. This is a $40 billion industry, international education, and it's been severely impacted by COVID with borders closed since March and no new arrivals. There are, of course, a lot of students who actually remained here. Just to give you an example, in April we still had, for example, 18,000 students from Colombia who were here. But yes, the outlook for 2021 is not great at the moment because we honestly don't know when borders are opening, and we don't know how many pilot programs are going to be allowed for international students. And just to finish on that point, migration is obviously always a hot topic, and it's very much about permanent and temporary visas too. And international students up until recently have taken up about 25% of the places of the temporary migrants in Australia.
The education system is quite interesting. It seems from the outside in that the focus at university level, there seems to be an element of privatisation in universities, and the focus isn't necessarily on education, but it's about making a quid. So the requirement of international students has become vital. Is that affecting the general education system because of that slight change of focus?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, the thing is, universities, I think some years ago, received less government funding, and as a result looked to other strategies, I guess, to be able to bolster their own funds and to provide that level of education, to which you're referring, a good, high-quality level of education. And so international students, that made a lot of sense. They pay an awful lot of money for a degree in Australia. You could pay, as an international student, up to $40,000 per year, for example, for a master's degree, let's say, at Sydney University. So it obviously has brought in a large amount of income for universities, and there's been a lot of focus on certain countries in particular. There is obviously talk about, has that brought down the level of education? In general, international students, they obviously they come here for a reason, and that's to have the same education as others. There have been issues in the past where there's been exam results, supposedly, students who've had to pass exams regardless of whether they're at that level or not, just because they're from overseas. Now, I think that those cases are in the minority, actually. In the majority, most students come away very satisfied, but the big issue at the moment is, yes, it is about the education, but I think by and large what universities are having to look at is how they're competing on a global level anyway, and if they are providing a vocational type of education which will allow graduates to be really job ready and perhaps provide industry placements and those types of things.
Another secondary issue that comes on the back of this, I imagine a lot of the international students would come from quite wealthy families and haven't had to worry too much about life in Australia, but there's a lot that need to work and have part-time occupation, and there's also a lot of migrants that come to Australia perhaps illegally and are wanting to work as well, and with that comes a lot of exploitation. That came to a head some years ago with the 7-Eleven stores being the first of many to be found out to be systematically and deliberately underpaying their staff. Is that still an issue with the student population initially, which you seem to have a good handle on, but more so other migrants that are or visitors that are coming to our country?
It's certainly been an issue, actually, Rob. And I mean, over these last few months, there's no doubt that a lot of exploitation issues have come up, whether it's with seasonal workers, for example, backpackers in agriculture. There's been a few of those stories, although I hear some fantastic stories too from farmers around the place. For example, a farmer up in Darwin, in the Northern Territory, who's helping to build houses for seasonal workers from Vanuatu and so on. So there's some wonderful stories too. But there's no doubt with the increasing number of international students, statistically, I suppose you're going to get more of those types of things. You know, back in 2005, we had very low numbers of international students. That has gone up exponentially by 2019, hence the $40 billion industry, and providing 250,000 jobs or more. But yes, these stories are abound. They are very much the authorities and the powers that be are very much aware of those. There's a lot of community organisations. For example, I'm based in Sydney, and we've seen the Sydney Alliance that are looking at setting up an international hub for students here to help to educate them further about exploitation issues and about their rights within the workplace and so on. So I think what we're seeing is, yes, there has been exploitation. I think that will happen from a certain cohort of employers, actually, and students may accept those lower wages and they don't want to say anything because they're frightened of having their visa cancelled and so on. In other areas, I would say it's really tightened up. What you were talking about, the 7-Eleven, that was the 457 visa that has changed, that visa, in the last 3 years, and it has been made much tighter. It is much harder to do that type of thing, to exploit in that way with those visa types. And as I said, with international students, the good thing about COVID, if we're going to take positive out of negative, is these issues have been highlighted, and there are a lot of organisations now that are also government funded or state government funded that are looking to assist and educate.
Yeah, Melanie Macfarlane is with us discussing issues of migration. It was interesting you made that comment, and I guess it's just human nature that you're going to hear good and bad stories depending on the type of people that are employing. And yesterday I was listening to an issue on ABC radio regarding the fruit picking and vegetable picking and how difficult it is for people to find workers, because the majority of their staff in the past have been migrant or visiting or backpacker type situations that have come to Australia. And you hear some great stories about good employers who house and feed their staff and pay them well and they want to come back, but some other horrific ones that are clearly about exploitation as much as possible. Do you feel authorities say they're on top of things, but on the ground level it seems that it's still happening? Are you confident that government agencies are policing this as well as they can?
Yeah, I mean, it is. You're right. There is always good and bad. And yeah, there is that in human nature, and we have to look at the employers as well as educating the others, the migrants themselves about their rights and so on. I think it's a work in progress, Rob. I really do. There's never any perfect solution, but I think the key is awareness. And COVID has so highlighted these issues that they're not just going to go away now, and they cannot be swept under the carpet. And wherever I go, I work a lot with, for example, the industries of agriculture, even and childcare, hospitality, and so on. There's a lot of awareness now within the industry associations also, and I think that is key to ensuring that from now on, there just has to be more policing of this issue and more roundtable discussions, but real action to stop it happening. Yeah,
I've been very dismayed, I must admit, with the lack of penalty for what have been many proven cases over the last 3 to 5 years. 7-Eleven probably kicked it off, but there's been many other in that same type of industry, but other food delivery services hospitality types where this has been, it seems quite rampant, but very minor penalty. So I hope they are onto it, because I think it's a major embarrassment to our country. There's a lot of other negatives. Manus Island and Christmas Island and detention in itself is probably another 20-minute conversation for another day. But let's look positive. Let's finish this discussion with, you mentioned changes that COVID have made. What do you see being a real positive change for international people movement in the future, based on what we've had come at us in the last 6 to 8 months?
Well, I think, as we know, we've talked about these issues that have come up and been highlighted during this time. And I certainly know that, for example, the Department of Education is having a look very carefully at quality. It's been an opportunity for them to really look at quality audits and so on of education providers, for example, to increase that quality within the sector. Also, it's an opportunity to revisit the migration program to see that it is working as it should be, to ensure that the skills authorities are really doing their due diligence and making sure that people really do have that skill set, to stop people creating false applications and so on. That's also very important. I think, the fact that there will be less, there is less migration at the moment, and I think, the figures show that we'll have a population of less than 1 million by 2020 as a result of all of this. There is more time to be able to set those migration levels, have a really careful look at exactly what is needed in Australia, but be able to, there are settings, for example, skilled occupation lists that can change every 6 months, which means that there can be regular checks on what is happening. And so I think, I take away from a big positive out of this, that things are being done, they are being looked at. There's now a committee where even migration agents and lawyers can speak to government, give advice also from their perspective, so that there's more collaboration as a result. And ultimately, that's the most important thing, collaboration. And
there's so many ripple effect changes. We've talked about the Australian workforce that requires these migrant and travelling workers that aren't going to be here. So there's going to be a whole reset in the way our industry, general business, particularly agriculture, looks in the next 2 to 5 years.
That's right. That's exactly right. In agriculture, I was in Darwin last week and talking to the Northern Territory Farmers Association, for example, and there's a lot of focus on bringing over the seasonal workers, for example, from Vanuatu. That can be very well policed and ensure that they're receiving adequate salary and so on. There's also the Regional Migration Institute is doing a lot of work at the moment to look at attracting Australians into those regional areas as well. And even from my own point of view, we're looking at providing case studies from migrants who have been there for some time now, to show that there is more to Australia than just the metropolitan cities. I know you're there in Geelong, which for immigration purposes is considered as a regional area at this point, although of course it's so close to Melbourne. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening.
Yeah, there is. I have lived in a small regional town where the requirement for workers was constant, and the unemployment rate was about 1.5%, which is clearly zero in realistic terms. So encouraging people out of cities into the country, I think, is going to be a really important step for the future of Australia, and I can see only positives coming out of that, and let's hope they can put some real structure in around that. I think it's a good idea. Melanie Macfarlane, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's an interesting subject, and I reckon sometime early in the new year we might come back to you and go down this path in a slightly different direction, because it's such a diverse and divisive discussion, migration, but you seem to have a pretty good handle on trends, and by January we might know a lot more about what the 2021 is going to look like.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Rob.
Absolute pleasure to chat to you. Melanie Macfarlane.